Today's in-studio guest is no stranger to Arizona State University, but his new job is. Jacob Moore has been announced as the new Vice President and Special Advisor to the President on American Indian Affairs. His goal is to expand ASU's initiatives to better support Indigenous communities. Moore was formerly the Associate Vice President of Tribal Relations in the Office of Government and Community Affairs at ASU. Mr. Moore, hello to you and congratulations.
Thank you. It's good day.
I'd like to start off because this position that you're in formerly had a late tribal leader in it. That was Peterson Zaw. How has his legacy impacted the work that you do today?
You know, it has a lot to do with really setting the foundation in terms of the kind of programming, the focus that Arizona State has, not just to American Indian students, but to centers and educational programs. For me, it's also very special in the sense that my father, Josiah Moore, in the O'odham language we would say Josiah Bott, since he passed, both were fellow classmates in probably about 1963, 1964. They both attended the Center for Indian Education to get their degrees in education. My father got his degree in education with a minor in Indian Ed, so Peterson Zaw, Vernon Massa Yesva, and a handful of what became tribal leaders really started their education at ASU in the early 60s.
There are a number of Indigenous students who attend school at Arizona State University. What are the greatest needs for these Indigenous scholars in order to get their degree and then, of course, advance to be successful after?
So I'm fortunate in terms of, taking on this role and following, some very illustrious leaders. Dr. Zaw, Peterson Zaw, was here for probably 12 to 15 years. Diane Hemitua, former U.S. attorney and now federal district court judge, and then Dr. Brayboy. Dr. Brayboy was the director for Center for Indian Ed, and his research talked about 4 particular areas. One is the academic preparation. The second is financial assistance. Next would be cultural congruency or incongruency in terms of the culture shock that Native students feel when they come to a large campus like Arizona State. And then the fourth is let me see, there's financial aid, there's also role models and mentors. And we've added another one to that list, which is really health and wellness. We know that having our students really be healthy and ensure that we're taking care of their well-being is that we're coming out of a difficult period in terms of the pandemic, and there's still significant grief in our communities, and our students bring that with them as well.
I could imagine. I want to talk about the current initiatives that serve Indigenous students. Tell us about some of the greatest successes that you're seeing right now.
I would say the greatest one for me that we're most proud of is the number of graduates that we have that are coming out of the university. We have fall graduations, we have graduations in spring, and we had over 300 in the fall and about 400 in the spring, so that's 700 Native students coming out with bachelor's, master's, PhD, law school degrees, perhaps one of the highest producing universities when it comes to Native completing their degree. The other is a high number of Indigenous faculty, over 60 throughout the university, everything from the fine arts to architecture to law to social work, and so it's just really a fun place to be.
I'd love to give you the moment to reflect on yourself and your identity. You mentioned earlier that your father, it seems, is someone that you've taken a lot of strength from. Mm-hmm. In your position, what does it mean to be an O'odham person and being in this very powerful position to help Native students?
I guess, again, I also want to recognize not just Josiah Bott, but all of the leaders that came before, because I knew them, and I learned from them. And I think one of the lessons was that this idea that these institutions of higher ed have a responsibility for the economic stability, the well-being, the continuation of the culture and language with our tribal nations and communities, just as they do for other stakeholders, whether it's microchip makers or construction. And so it's a recognition that our tribal nations and communities are very much one of those stakeholders that the university has a responsibility to support, and being in a position where I can help advance that is quite an honor.
You very recently took this position, so if we were looking a year from now, what goals do you hope that you've achieved by then?
I would say, in the short term is to ensure that we are listening, that we understand what the priorities of tribal nations and communities are and how does the university fit in versus the other way around. And also, I think, obviously, an increase in enrollment, but more importantly, retention and moving toward graduation so that, one, we get them in, we get them out with a degree that has real value in a timely manner. So.
We know that we just finished graduation season for Native American students all across the country. If there was a high school student who was maybe thinking, hey, ASU is somewhere that I would maybe consider, what would be your message to them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of options, for students to consider, but regardless of where they decide to go, I think just thinking early, even in junior high and high school about preparing for this idea that college is a viable option for them and that they can come to any of our campuses in education and social work and law and engineering, but also this idea that they can attend online as well. We're seeing a significant increase in online students, in part because we're really, expecting them to, in regular classes, have them, come out of their own communities, and perhaps they can stay within their own communities and be, contribute back into their community, but also continue their education as well. So there's all kinds of opportunities for young people to really take a hard look, and they should start looking now.
Well, Jacob Moore, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. AMC's Dark Winds has a new season premiering on July 30th. The show is filled with Indigenous talent in front and behind the screen. ICT's Paris Wise has this interview with the series lead, Zon McClernand.
Dark Winds, like last year, is a mystery crime show, which is set on the Navajo reservation about Joe Lee Porn. It's based on Tony Hillerman books with Joe Lee Porn, who I play, and Kiowa Gordon is Jim Chi, Jessica Matten as Bernadette, and Deanna Allison, who plays my wife. And we've got a ton of actors this year on the show. We've got quite a list of Navajo actors as well on the show. We've got some great guest stars, and the overview is basically about Joe Lee Porn finds some evidence regarding his child that he had lost in the previous season, and he pursues that evidence to find out what happened to him. Trying not to do any spoiler alerts,
You mentioned you're returning with the other series leads such as Kiowa Gordon and Jessica Matten. How will we see the relationships between these characters progress?
I think there's a bit more levity this year with the show. We're trying to bring a little bit more of the what it's really like on the res and the humor within our cultures and the relationships, the teasing between people. So there's more levity within the show and with these characters. So difficult not to spoil the show to tell you, exactly what has happened. But I think you'll, bottom line is you'll see more levity.
How have the relationships between you as actors also progressed now that you've been able to work together again?
Well, I've known Jessica and Kiowa we've worked together in the past we did a show together called Frontier, Jason Momoa, and I worked with Kiowa on a Sundance series as well. So I've known those guys for quite a while, and we've all become close friends, and we stay in contact when we're not working as well. Keep in touch, and I've grown to care deeply for my wife, who is Deanna Allison, who is a Navajo actress from, she grew up in, I believe, Albuquerque, or I think she grew up in the Navajo res, but she lives in Albuquerque now. So we've gotten very close to all my castmates over the past couple of seasons. Just like every show you're on, you get close to the people you work with and you develop relationships.
Well, speaking of, I have to bring up your character, Officer Big in Reservation Dogs, who will be making his last appearance in the show's series finale. What would you say that character taught you, and how will you look back at this time being able to take part in that show?
Yeah, I think Reservation Dogs as well as Dark Winds has broken down a few doors, cracked that door open a little bit more for Native representation, and not just for actors, but people behind the scenes, crew, producers, writers, directors. We've on both shows we've established some new talent. This year on Dark Winds, we have Billy Luther, who is Navajo, who is doing an episode, directing an episode, and he also wrote an episode. So I think both shows have broken down some of those, or just not broken them down, but cracked open those doors for other talent to pursue working in television and film.
Funnily enough, both of these characters that you play are officers. We can see some of the differences between them, but can you tell us more just some,
Big is pretty goofy conspiracy. And Joe Leaphorn's kind of an intense kind of character, but
Absolutely. Would you say there are any similarities though that you brought out in each role, or
yeah, they're res cops. That's about it. The only similarity I can see.
Well, what has it been like playing a more serious role, and will there be new sides to Joe Leaphorn that viewers will see from this character in this season?
I think this season, again, I mentioned Joe finds some evidence regarding his child. I think that this season, Leaphorn's moral code is questioned, is challenged, his morality, and what he does with that evidence and the situations he finds himself in. I think he has a lot of different choices to make in this season, and I think people in general can relate to those kind of characters because we all have to go through that within our lifetimes, within our lives, that we have many choices and many roads to take, and which ones do we do? And he comes up against that quite a bit in this season. Also, what that means for his relationships to his co-workers, and with Jim Chi and Bernadette, and what that means to his relationship with his wife and his community.
How did you, as an actor preparing for this role, prepare for all of that?
Just a lot. Just know the story, know the character, know your dialogue, obviously, and just prep as much as you possibly can, and show up prepared and be open-minded to things that can change within scenes, with the other actors, with listening, and just being exploring these characters, and remaining open, remaining teachable within the characters. I think is very important, but mainly just be prepared. Prep work is very important.
Yeah.
Show up and be professional.
With your career, spanning over 30 years, did you ever see yourself doing the work that you're doing now?
Well, I'd hope to. I think that every actor hopes that they can work consistently and make a living as an actor. I pinch myself once in a while. I do. I feel very, very fortunate to be in this time period of representation for Native peoples. I'm extremely fortunate to be here and doing what I'm doing.
Well, looking back at when roles and shows like this weren't exactly around, what made you want to stick through it, through the ebbs and flows?
I just love acting. I love the craft of acting. I love going to class and studying and becoming, refining that craft and being the best possible actor that I could be. I enjoyed for a long time, I enjoyed the grind of it. I enjoyed going to auditions and being in Los Angeles and pursuing something that I wanted to do. I had goals, and I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of those goals.